She glanced back once, and time stopped. In that single heartbeat, a woman became a monument of salt, and an entire city vanished beneath flame. For centuries, this story warned humanity, don't look back when God calls you forward. But what if the warning wasn't just spiritual? What if something tangible still stands in the desert, evidence that faith and science are not enemies, but witnesses of the same truth? Archaeologists digging near the Dead Sea have uncovered something so precise, so haunting, that even the skeptics had no words. Before we continue, subscribe for more discoveries where faith meets archaeology, and don't forget to turn on notifications for our next revelation from the Holy Land. The wind over the Dead Sea still tastes of salt and ash. The land itself seems scorched by memory. Here, the book of Genesis places one of humanity's most mysterious moments, a moment when heaven's fire blurred the line between miracle and catastrophe. Long before archaeologists arrived with their tools and cameras, this region was feared as cursed. Ancient travelers wrote of unusual formations, salt columns and rock walls twisted like wax. Some swore they saw a woman's shape still standing there, forever frozen by one forbidden glance. The locals gave her a name no one forgets, Lot's wife. For generations, skeptics called it symbolism, a warning story, nothing more. But deep beneath the salt crust, the desert was keeping secrets, small magnetic grains of melted mineral. Fragments of structures that looked as if lightning itself had struck from heaven. When scientists began to study these traces, what they found set off heated debates around the world, because the evidence seemed to whisper the same words carved in Scripture. Fire came from above, a blast so intense it could level cities and turn rivers to vapor. If this devastation truly happened, then the question remains, what else might still lie hidden behind the white cliffs of Mount Sodom? It began with mercy. As dawn broke over the plain, an angel's voice urged Lot and his family to flee. Run, do not look back. Behind them, Sodom still slept, unaware of the fire about to descend. The command was simple, but the cost was heavy. Every step away tore at memories, their home, their friends, the life they were leaving. When the roar began, the ground trembling and heat rising, a single moment of hesitation changed everything. Lot's wife turned. That one glance, half love, half longing, became her undoing. The Bible says she became a pillar of salt. Many picture it as punishment, yet tucked inside this judgment lies something deeper. She looked back at a world collapsing, unable to let go of what God had already condemned. The freezing of her body becomes a symbol of the freezing of her heart, a life caught between obedience and nostalgia. To believers through the centuries, her story carries a warning as clear as fire. Sometimes salvation requires walking away without turning around. That truth still echoes louder than any explosion. But here's where the mystery deepens. The valley that echoed with screams in the ancient text, the Valley of Siddim, is real. And the salt flat where Lot's wife looked back still rises at the edge of the Dead Sea. Travelers through history have described a single eerie pillar standing there, shaped almost like a human figure, watching over the wasteland. Could this monument be coincidence or testimony cast in stone? The answer might lie within the very mountain behind that figure. A mountain that breathes salt and hides ancient fire. Mount Sodom is more than a ridge of salt. It's a geological fortress that rises 500 feet above a sea of silence. Its inner walls shimmer like crystal, but beneath that beauty lies a history written in heat. When archaeologists first set foot inside its narrow caverns, they weren't expecting awe, they were expecting dust. What they found instead left even the seasoned among them quiet. Within the chalky tunnels lay twists of darkened material, mineral veins once thought to be ordinary sediment, now discovered to contain microscopic spheres fused by unimaginable heat. Temperatures strong enough to melt rock. Something catastrophic had happened here. Some researchers pointed to a cosmic airburst, a fireball exploding above the plain centuries ago, that could have unleashed a wave of energy as fierce as a nuclear blast. Others called it divine judgment recorded in stone, two interpretations of the same scar. Yet the most haunting discovery wasn't chemical, it was visible. Deep in the mountain's side, explorers came upon a towering column separated from the salt wall by a narrow gap, as if it had stepped forward from the cliff itself. Sunlight poured through the crevice and outlined the column's shape: rounded head, curved torso, trailing robe. Bedouin guides stopped and bowed their heads. "That is her," they said softly. The legend lived in the rock itself. Ancient historians spoke of seeing such a figure still standing in their own time. Could this be the same pillar that endured for thousands of years, weathering storms and quakes, yet refusing to fall? Whether science names it geology or faith names it miracle, the result is the same. The mountain holds its silence, keeping one lone figure facing the past she could not leave. And then came the moment that turned mystery into obsession, when scientists began digging beyond Mount Sodom's shadow, uncovering traces of fire far beyond the mountain itself. The Dead Sea is a paradox. It shimmers under the desert sun like a sheet of glass, yet no fish, no plant, no bird can survive its waters. It's the lowest place on earth, a vast wound in the land, fed by rivers that never escape. Everything that enters, the minerals, the salt, even the stories, stays trapped forever. Standing on its western edge is Mount Sodom, a 5-mile ridge made almost entirely of salt. The air here feels heavy, thick with minerals and memory. Every gust of wind carries flakes that sting the skin and taste like tears. The locals say the mountain is alive, changing its shape every season as the salt expands and crumbles. Hidden in those folds are strange towers, columns that look carved, though no human hand touched them. One, taller than the rest, seems to possess a neck, shoulders, even a folded cloak. Pilgrims and wanderers stare at it in silence before whispering the same ancient name, Lot's wife. Guides point to her profile against the sun and tell the story as if it happened yesterday, when fire fell from heaven and the land itself turned to salt. To outsiders, it might sound like folklore, but even to professional geologists, these formations defy easy explanation. Natural processes can build pillars, but this one stands where the old text said judgment struck. The odds of that alignment are almost impossible. Perhaps it's coincidence, or perhaps the land kept a single witness standing, a sentinel molded from the world she could not leave behind. Yet the mystery doesn't end with shapes in the rock. Deeper layers of the mountain hold something stranger still, glassy fragments that shouldn't exist in salt at all. A few kilometers north of Mount Sodom, the desert opens into a plain where cities once stood. What looks like a wasteland now may have been a thriving region 4,000 years ago. Homes, markets, courtyards buzzing with life. Then, in a moment no one could have survived, it ended. When teams began examining sites like Bab ed Dhra and Tal el Hammam, They expected ordinary ruins. Instead, they uncovered evidence of instant obliteration. Pottery fused into glass, floors turned to ash, stones bubbled as though set in a furnace. The heat had reached levels no ancient fire pit could achieve. One researcher described it best. It looked as if lightning had struck every building at once. There were charred human remains, carbonized plants, melted surfaces, all frozen mid-catastrophe. And scattered throughout the debris were tiny glassy beads, the same microspherules found inside Mount Sodom itself. To the scientist, they hinted at a mid-air explosion, something like a meteor breaking apart and igniting the atmosphere. To the believer, they sounded like the sky tearing open to rain fire and brimstone. The parallels were impossible to ignore. Geological surveys traced a line of devastation stretching directly toward the Dead Sea. The very cities long dismissed as myths appeared to have experienced a real, searing disaster. Yet even as new data filled research journals, a larger question burned beneath every dig site. If the cities did fall in fire, what could have preserved a human-shaped pillar of salt nearby? How could any material stand untouched amid such annihilation? All eyes turned back to that mountain of crystallized salt, a witness perched above a vanished civilization. But the next discoveries would twist the story even further. Instruments scanning the buried levels of the Dead Sea began to reveal shapes, structures, hiding beneath the salt crust itself. The more scientists mapped the Dead Sea basin, the stranger the evidence became. Beneath layers of hardened salt lay fractured stone walls, burned pottery, and traces of ash compacted under centuries of mineral buildup. It looked as though the land itself had folded over a buried memory. Each scan, each core sample, drew one picture more clearly, a catastrophe that struck with impossible heat, then sealed its victims beneath an ocean of salt. The tension between worlds grew louder. Some researchers insisted it was a cosmic event, a meteor bursting in the sky with the power of a nuclear explosion. For others, the pattern matched something still older, the ancient account of cities judged in fire. Two explanations, separated by vocabulary but not by scope, stared at each other across the sand. Standing among these contradictions, a curious harmony began to form. The scientists' data pointed upward toward the sky. The scripture story pointed downward toward the same place. Both described an instant of white-hot destruction. Both ended with silence. It was as if, for once, faith and science were tracing the same fingerprint. The realization unsettled many. Could the language of physics and the voice of prophecy be describing the same event? And there was more. Instruments that tested mineral layers near Mount Sodom found signs of sudden crystallization. Salt fused so quickly that no slow evaporation process could explain it. Something had accelerated natural chemistry within seconds, solidifying everything in its path. Here, at the crossroads of laboratories and legends, archaeologists began to pause, not because of what they had proven, but because of what they might have stumbled into without meaning to. Then, one morning, a team climbing the ridgeline discovered an outline no one could rationalize, a pillar, human-sized, separated from the cliff by daylight itself. At first light, the ridge glowed gold, the air still and heavy with salt. One member of the expedition noticed a shadow that didn't match the rest of the mountain. It was narrower, taller, and unmistakably human. When the sun cleared the horizon, the shape emerged fully, a pillar of pure salt, rounded at the crown, tapering into folds that looked almost like the drape of cloth. Cameras flashed, scanners buzzed, and yet the sight fell into a hush. Everyone felt it. This wasn't just geology. The locals who guided the team didn't need instruments. They already knew what it was. In their tradition, this solitary pillar had stood watch for generations. "She still faces Sodom," one of them whispered. Tests showed that the pillar's salt composition matched Mount Sodom's interior, but its crystallization pattern differed. It appeared to have cooled faster, as though an external force had transformed it in an instant. Its position, too, was uncanny, angled toward the ancient plains now believed to have hosted Sodom and Gomorrah. Word of the discovery sparked headlines across continents. Some articles called it coincidence, others confirmation. Geologists described rare processes that might carve such a figure. Believers saw something no natural process could reproduce, a monument molded by obedience and disobedience in the same moment. Standing before it, even skeptics admitted the chill it brought. The form seemed alive, caught mid-motion, neck turning backward. Whether creation or accident, art or evidence, the sight pressed one question into the mind of every viewer. What had frozen a human stance into stone? Scientists kept recording data, but something more elusive was taking shape here, a sense that the landscape itself remembered. Because the investigation wasn't over, a deeper dig in the ruins below would uncover fragments that carried the signature of that same burning sky. Each shard lifted from the sand shimmered faintly, flecks of glass fused with ash, specks of a moment too hot for time to erase. The scientists logged data. The guides bowed their heads. Somewhere between measurement and memory, meaning seeped in. Lot's wife had turned back because something in her refused to let go. The story endures not because of the salt, but because everyone recognizes the impulse to cling to what is familiar even when it breaks us. The cities had become shadows long before they burned. The fire only finished what the heart had already chosen. For believers, the archaeology sharpened that old warning. The destruction wasn't random, the statue not simply chemistry. It was a delicate merging of mercy and justice, rescue offered, choice made, consequence sealed. Each find in the dust seemed to whisper the same reminder. Progress means walking forward even when the past glows behind you. Even the researchers sensed the pull. Confronted with ruins strangely aligned with the ancient text, they found themselves whispering a verse they once dismissed, "Remember Lot's wife." In that simple command, the desert speaks, urging the living not to stand still, not to turn around, not to be captured by what once was. Yet the lesson isn't sorrow alone. Where salt ends, new layers of sediment begin. After every storm, the Dead Sea catches starlight again. Out of judgment, survival. Out of loss, a path forward. Lot and his daughters walked on. But the pillar still stands, unmoving, its salt face turned to a place erased by flame. And just as explorers believe the story has finished revealing itself, a new signal starts to emerge from beneath the Dead Sea, one that could rewrite how we see everything buried there. When night falls over the Dead Sea, Mount Sodom glows faintly under the moonlight, its cliffs catching silver reflections. And in that pale shine, the lone pillar still casts a shadow across the salt plain, as if guarding what remains of forgotten cities. For centuries, travelers have traced that outline and wondered how stone can resemble sorrow so perfectly. Modern technology answers what legend only guessed. New imaging equipment, peering beneath the salt layers, reveals hollows that seem too symmetrical to be natural. Walls, arches, patterns scorched into the deep mineral crust. The line between ruin and miracle grows thinner with every scan. Scientists map data. Pilgrims fall silent. Faith interprets while science measures, yet both stand before the same enigma, an entire region frozen in testimony. The pillar, regardless of whom it represents, has become a marker where belief and evidence meet. It speaks, without words, that something extraordinary once happened here, something bigger than chemistry, older than myth. The meaning extends beyond archaeology. This story, like the mountain, refuses to erode. It reminds each generation that judgment and mercy often share the same horizon, and that every decision to turn back carries a consequence carved deeper than stone. To those who doubted, the land itself whispers, "Look closer." To those who already believe, it seems to answer faith with form, turning a moral into a monument. Mount Sodom keeps its secrets, but each grain of salt underfoot feels like a fragment of that sacred event. Part science, part sermon, all silence. And somewhere beneath those salted layers, instruments still register strange echoes, faint, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat deep in the mountain. The earth might not be finished telling its story. Before dawn, the Dead Sea lies still, flat as polished metal. The air is heavy with salt and history. Somewhere out there, beneath miles of crystalline crust, rest the fragments of a story both warned and wept over. Each breeze carries a faint hiss through Mount Sodom's fissures, like the mountain whispering what words can't hold. What remains here isn't a relic of punishment so much as a record of mercy delayed, choice offered, outcome sealed. The researchers, the pilgrims, the skeptics, all who pass through this canyon of salt leave quieter than they arrived. They've touched evidence of something at once physical and moral, proof that a landscape can remember. Lot's wife reminds humanity that judgment is not cruelty, but consequence. To look back when called forward is to freeze decades into a single instant. Her story's force endures precisely because people recognize themselves in that turning motion, wanting what was, even as the future waits ahead. Every discovery, melted clay, glittering spheres, the unyielding pillar, seems to murmur the same paradox. Faith does not cancel reason, it widens it. In this desert, science confirms devastation. Faith reveals significance. Two halves of a single narrative carved into salt and fire. And as night returns, Mount Sodom stands outlined against the stars, the pillar still facing the plains where cities once burned. Whether formed by cosmic fire or divine hand, it remains both question and answer. Not just an artifact, but a voice, frozen, luminous, unignorable. Perhaps one day another storm will peel back the crust, exposing more of what sleeps below. Perhaps the mountain will reveal the rest of its memory. Until then, the figure endures, gazing eternally backward while the world moves forward. The desert does not forget. It waits.